I want to talk about this morning Nehemiah. That's who I want to look at this morning. And Nehemiah has always kind of been a perplexing individual to me. The thing about him, well, let me open this up with what comes to mind for y'all when you think about Nehemiah. I'd like to hear from y'all first. Was he a prophet? I don't think he was. Mm-hmm. Industrious. Yeah. What else? So he was the cupbearer for the king. We know that. What anybody know what a cupbearer's responsibilities are? Yeah. So
and he was responsible for the vineyards and the upkeep of the vineyards as well as the wine itself.
yeah. So basically, he was a fail-safe to make sure that the king didn't get poisoned. My understanding. So anything that the king was going to ingest or drink, he tasted it first to make sure that it was not poisonous. So I don't know. Might have been. Maybe. Yeah. He's tasting everything. So kind of, in my mind at least, kind of an unassuming role. You know, I don't know all the ins and outs or the intricacies of that position that he held, but it seems like a bit of an unassuming role considering the things that he did later in his life. He really rose to the occasion later on, but he's in this role and he's a servant, he's subjected to the king, he's taking on this responsibility of potentially dying in his king's stead. So it's an honorable position, but seems a bit unassuming for somebody like Nehemiah because he showed so many leadership capabilities later on. So talking about the background of the book of Nehemiah, y'all kind of, does anybody know what the background of that book is? Rebuilding the temple, rebuilding the wall surrounding Jerusalem. So Jerusalem or Israel had come back from the Babylonian captivity. I was always under the impression that it was fairly recent after that happened, but it's like 100 years after they were released by Cyrus before the book of Nehemiah takes place. So that was an interesting fact that I uncovered when I was studying this. And, very interesting to me that there was that much time between when they were released. Cyrus decreed, that they're going to be released. Cyrus was a Persian ruler. When they overtook the Babylonians, he said, we're going to let these people go back to where they're from. And then 100 years later, is when Nehemiah, this stuff takes place in Nehemiah. So
actually, just a little over 100 years. Yeah. Because the dictum to release the Jews came in 586, and then we're dealing with the wall of 443.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Any other thoughts on the background and stuff?
I have a note in my Bible. It's actually the last book of the Old Testament.
Yes.
I guess what would be the word?
In the history of the Jews, Nehemiah was the end of history. Everything after Nehemiah is repetition of what took place before.
Okay. All right. Well, let's go ahead and get into the text. I'll just start reading chapter 1, verse 1. The words of Nehemiah, the son of Hakaliah, came to pass in the month of Chislev, in the 20th year that I was in Shushan, the citadel, that Hananiah, one of my brethren, came with men from Judah, and I asked them concerning the Jews who had escaped, who had survived the captivity, and concerning Jerusalem.
And they said to me, the survivors who are left from the captivity in the province are there in great distress and reproach. The wall of Jerusalem is also broken down, and its gates are burned with fire. So it was when I heard these words that I sat down and wept and mourned for many days. I was fasting and praying before the God of heaven. And I said, I pray, Lord God of heaven, O great and awesome God, you who keep your covenant and mercy with those who love you and observe your commandments, please let your ear be attentive and your eyes open, that you may hear the prayer of your servant, which I pray before you now, day and night for the children of Israel, your servants, and confess the sins of the children of Israel, which we have sinned against you. Both my father's house and I have sinned. We've acted very corruptly against you, have not kept the commandments, the statutes, nor the ordinances which you commanded your servant Moses. Remember, I pray, the word that you commanded your servant Moses, saying, if you are unfaithful, I will scatter you among the nations. But if you return to me and keep my commandments and do them, though some of you were cast out to the farthest part of the heavens, yet I will gather them from there and bring them to the place which I have chosen as a dwelling for my name. Now these are your servants and your people, whom you have redeemed by your great power and by your strong hand. O Lord, I pray, please let your ear be attentive to the prayer of your servant, to the prayer of your servants who desire to fear your name, and let your servant prosper this day, I pray, and grant him mercy in the sight of this man, for I was the king's cupbearer. So we see there he's a cupbearer for the king. Going back to that role that he had, he had to have some type of sense of duty within himself to serve in that capacity. Duty and service, and then some level of measure of courage to continuously taste wine that could be poison, not really knowing until he put it in his mouth whether it was or not. And then just the humility to place himself under to be subject to something like that. Those are kind of some positive traits that I see just from the fact that he was a cupbearer. And then also wanted to highlight upon the hearing of the state of the people in Jerusalem. What was his first response? What did he immediately do?
Well, we have to, I think we look back if I'm not wrong. Then those that were left, we might play with the color.
Or what?
Mm-hmm. But here, everybody did benefit to them. There's not one thing, all of this work, all the things, and they were, if you think about old ones and all that, probably about 7 years ago. But then, without apparently any much leadership or whatever, then they were pretty much in a desperate situation.
Yeah. So the one word he said there that I want y'all to put in on is that leadership. They didn't have much, and Nehemiah's going to fill that role when he gets there. So what in this passage we just read, what was his first response to hearing what was the first thing he did?
Got down and wept.
Who said it?
Sat down and wept.
Yeah, he wept and then he prayed, right? Prayed, fasted, turned to God, basically. That was his immediate response. So that's another positive attribute of Nehemiah and God. He understands God's power and God's ability to affect change in the situation. So let's move on to chapter 2. I'm going to read verses 1 through 10.
And it came to pass in the month of Nisan, and in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, when wine was before him, that I took the wine and gave it to the king. Now I had never been sad in his presence before. Therefore the king said to me, why is your face sad, since you are not sick? This is nothing but sorrow of heart. So I became dreadfully afraid, and said to the king, may the king live forever. Why should my face not be sad when the city, the place of my father's tombs, lies waste, and its gates are burned with fire? Then the king said to me, "What do you request?" So I prayed to the God of heaven, and I said to the king, "If it pleases the king, if your servant has found favor in your sight, I ask that you send me to Judah, to the city of my father's tombs, that I may rebuild it." Then the king said to me, the queen also sitting beside him, "How long will your journey be? And when will you return?" So it pleased the king to send me, and I set him a time. Furthermore, I said to the king, "If it pleases the king, let letters be given to me for the governors of the region beyond the river, that they must permit me to pass through till I come to Judah. And a letter to Asaph, the keeper of the king's forest, that he must give me timber to make beams for the gates of the citadel, which pertains to the temple, for the city wall, and for the house that I will occupy." And the king granted them to me according to the good hand of my God upon me. And then when I went to the governors in the region beyond the river, and gave them the king's letters, now the king had sent captains of the army and horsemen with me. When Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite official heard of it, they were deeply disturbed that a man had come to seek the well-being of the children of Israel. So, one thing that I notice in this chapter, for one thing, he had the respect of the king. The king wouldn't have done all this stuff for him. So, this is a guy that's his servant, that's his cupbearer, that basically puts himself in harm's way for the benefit of the king, and the king has enough respect for him to, first off, and enough of a relationship to understand something's wrong with him. So kind of implies, or we can deduce, that he was good at cultivating relationships. Nehemiah was. The king recognized something's wrong with this guy. You're not usually like this. Tell me what's up. So, and then he has the foresight to basically lay out everything he needed between the time he left there and got to Jerusalem. This is what I need. And he laid it all out for the king. And it was a big ask. That was not a small thing that he asked for. So kind of already see his ability to influence people right here. Yeah. Yep.
When he left, he was gone 12 years,
Mm-hmm.
then he came back.
Mm-hmm.
And then that year, first year he came back, he was allowed to go back and stay.
Mm-hmm.
Because he also helped reform. Ezra is known as a reformer.
Mm-hmm.
But Nehemiah did some reforming.
Yep.
Because he would not allow the heathen marriages
Yep.
to continue.
Yep.
But his primary job was to build that wall.
Exactly. And we're going to get to the reform stuff. Well, I say we will. We probably won't, because that's in chapter 13. But that is in my notes, and that's a big thing. This is a story of restoration, redemption, and reform. That's the story of Nehemiah, and just really impressive to me, the some of the qualities that he showed throughout this time. But the entire time he's doing this stuff, he's pointing to God all along the way. He's pointing people to God. He's not taking credit for any of it. He knows that he can't do it without God's help, and he is continuously pointing people to God. So, excellent point. Any other thoughts on chapter 2, verses 1 through 10 there?
It's been a long time since we've been there. You look at been at captivity for 7 years. I don't know how old he was. He ended up in Madison when he left, been back.
Don't have any timeline there.
So, we don't have any, but to hold two in a foreign land, to hold two God's way that long, that long. Hold two what they had been doing, and then when you get to that wall and temple and all of that, what they do.
Yeah, absolutely.
even though these people in Jerusalem were departing further and further from God, Nehemiah and those captives in that area were drawing closer to God.
Yep, absolutely.
That's why it was depressing when they went back to Jerusalem and saw the brethren so disarrayed.
The last thing I wanted y'all to know here was these two, Sanballat and Tobiah, they're going to come up later on. And
These guys are actually there in Jerusalem, and they hear that Nehemiah is coming. So you can see their response. They weren't happy about it. You're going to, if we get to that point today, you'll see why later on. So let's move on to verses 11 through 20. So I came to Jerusalem, and I was there 3 days. Then I arose in the night, I and a few men with me. I told no one what my God had put in my heart to do at Jerusalem, nor was there any animal with me except the one on which I rode. I went out by night through the valley gate to the serpent well and the refuse gate, and viewed the walls of Jerusalem which were broken down, and its gates which were burned with fire. Then I went on to the fountain gate and to the king's pool, but there was no room for the animal under me to pass. So I went up in the night by the valley and viewed the wall. Then I turned back and entered by the valley gate, and so returned. And the officials did not know where I had gone or what I had done. I had not yet told the Jews, the priests, the nobles, the officials, or the others who did the work. Then I said to them, "You see the distress that we are in, how Jerusalem lies in waste, and its gates are burned with fire. Come and let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem, that we may no longer be a reproach." And I told them of the hand of my God, which had been good upon me, and also of the king's words that he had spoken to me. So they said, "Let us rise up and build." And they set their hands to do. Then they set their hands to this good work. But when Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite official and Geshem the Arab heard it, they laughed at us and despised us and said, "What is this thing you are doing? Will you rebel against the king?" So I answered them and said to them, "The God of heaven himself will prosper us. Therefore we, his servants, will arise and build. But you have no heritage or right or memorial in Jerusalem." So he is basically walked in here and he's telling these people this is what needs to happen. And he just arrived 3 days prior to this. They probably have no idea who he is other than these guys that heard he was coming. They most likely don't know who he is. And he's telling them this is what needs to happen. We're a reproach to God. This is what we need to do to rectify that. And the response was, what? Let us rise up and build. So, very convincing and influential person, apparently, Nehemiah was. So, and he's ignoring the naysayers. These guys are laughing, scoffing at him, telling him, this isn't realistic. You're going against the king, all this stuff, and he's not hearing it. All he does is point them to God. He's on a mission. He knows what needs to happen, and he's not going to be deterred.
Help.
yeah.
And he denies them the truth.
Yep. So, chapter 3 here, or any other
Thoughts on that, chapter 2? I'm kind of going through this quick because I want us to get the gist of Nehemiah this morning. I'm fairly certain Josh will be back next Sunday, but is there any other thoughts?
The Persian king said he could do all this at his own expense. Nehemiah had to do what he had to do.
And look at the logistics, I guess, of what all took place, it's all the material that's needed. I don't know how far that had to be transported, but a long way.
Yeah. Did any of y'all catch that he sent his army to kind of usher him, and he didn't even ask for that? So he actually went a little further than what Nehemiah even asked for.
they actually used the same stone. When the Romans destroyed, I say the Romans, when the Romans destroyed the second temple, which the brother was going to rebuild, they plowed up the foundation stones and destroyed them all. Not so when they destroyed Solomon's temple. They just knocked the stones down. So all they had to do is use the same stone.
Wow, that's interesting. Any other thoughts on chapter 2? So chapter 3,
Wasn't going to read through the whole thing. It's basically a description of who was doing what during the rebuilding of the wall, or while along the way while they were rebuilding the wall. I'm going to go over to chapter 4, and this is when some of these people start giving them problems as they're trying to work. Let's see. But it so happened when Sanballat heard that we were rebuilding the wall, that he was furious and very indignant and mocked the Jews. And he spoke before his brethren and the army of Samaria and said, "What are these feeble Jews doing? Will they fortify themselves? Will they offer sacrifices? Will they complete it in a day? Will they revive the stones from the heaps of rubbish, stones that are burned?" Now Tobiah the Ammonite was beside him and said, "Whatever they build, even if a fox goes up on it, he will break down their stone wall. Hear, O God, hear, O our God, for we are despised. Turn their reproach on their own heads and give them as plunder to a land of captivity. Do not cover their iniquity, and do not let their sin be blotted out from before you, for they have provoked you to anger before the builders." So we built the wall, and the entire wall was joined together up to half its height, for the people had a mind to work. Now it happened when Sanballat, Tobiah, the Arabs, the Ammonites, and the Ashdodites heard that the walls of Jerusalem were being restored and the gaps were beginning to close, that they became very angry. All of them conspired together to come and attack Jerusalem and create confusion. Nevertheless, we made our prayer to our God, and because of them, we set a watch against them day and night. Then Judah said, "The strength of the laborers is failing, and there is so much rubbish that we are not able to build the wall." Our adversaries said, "They will neither know nor see anything till we come into their midst and kill them and cause the work to cease." So it was when the Jews who dwelt near them came that they told us 10 times, "From whatever place you turn, they will be upon us." Therefore I positioned men behind the lower parts of the wall at the openings, and I set the people according to their families with their swords, their spears, and their bows. And I looked and arose and said to the nobles, to the leaders, and to the rest of the people, "Do not be afraid of them. Remember the Lord, great and awesome, and fight for your brethren, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your houses." And it happened when our enemies heard that it was known to us, and that God had brought their plot to nothing, that all of us returned to the wall, every one to his work. So it was from that time on that half of my servants worked at construction, while the other half held the spears, the shields, the bows, and war armor, and the leaders were behind all the house of Judah. Those who built on the wall and those who carried burdens loaded themselves so that with one hand they worked at construction and with the other held a weapon. Every one of the builders had his sword girded at his side as he built, and the one who sounded the trumpet was beside me. Then I said to the nobles, the rulers, and the rest of the people, "The work is great and extensive, and we are separated far from one another on the wall. Wherever you hear the sound of the trumpet, rally to us there. Our God will fight for us." So we labored in the work, and half of the men held the spears from daybreak until the stars appeared. At the same time, I also said to the people, "Let each man and his servant stay at night in Jerusalem, that they may be our guard by night and a working party by day." So neither I, my brethren, my servants, nor the men of the guard who followed me took off our clothes, except that everyone took them off for washing. So, a lot there in chapter 4. First thing, to note is the opposition that they're under. Nehemiah's displaying courage under fire. They're anticipating an attack. In verse 6, these people are absolutely 100% dedicated to the cause at this point. They had a mind to work. And the reason they do have a mind to work is because of Nehemiah's leadership. One of the reasons his leadership is so effective is he's continuously pointing everybody to God and ensuring them that God has our back. He's supportive of what we're doing. This has been my experience thus far. Let's keep going, you know.
He had the ability to spur along.
Yeah.
He was just an actor.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe I said I'm the only one, but those who were in opposition, Sandwest and all those, that they were receiving, but who was in control of the area before they came back? You see, that they were in charge, they were reaping some of the benefits from the Jews not being there.
Right.
Or from those that were there, and probably they were the ones that were praising.
Yeah. So that, yes, exactly, you're exactly right, and that comes to light in a couple of chapters later, is just the economic state of that area is basically what you're describing.
And they remember how big and massive the Jews were in the past and how devastating they were. And they didn't want that to resurge.
Yep. Kind of similar to in the New Testament when the blacksmiths were upset because of their idols were going to be, they didn't want Christianity to spread because it was affecting their economy. So, similar situation. Yep. So
Verse 14, he reminds the people, inspiring courage in them to continue pressing forward. Verse 15, pointing to God again, giving God all the glory, not taking any himself. Verses 16 through 18, these people had a tool in one hand and a spear in the other, like they were ready to go at any moment. Verse 19 through 20 again shows Nehemiah's foresight and his ability to be strategic and place people in strategic areas. I mean, he's not a commander of an army, but he's putting people in a position to be successful defending this wall that they're working on. So very impressive.
They were armed forces and still they were.
yeah.
In a sense, he was the commander of an army, but it was just.
Yeah.
They had to do nothing to you.
Right. So again, it shows his dedication to the cause and his ability to inspire that dedication in other people. Are there any other thoughts on that chapter? So one other thing to highlight here is at the very end of the chapter, I mean, these guys were so dedicated, they didn't even take their clothes off except for washing. They were ready to go at any one time for whatever arose. Work, fighting, whatever. They kept the clothes on unless they were washing. All right, are we ready to move to chapter 5? Okay.
And there was a great outcry of the people and their wives against their Jewish brethren, for there were those who said, "We, our sons and our daughters are many. Therefore let us get grain, that we may eat and live." There were also some who said, "We have mortgaged our lands and vineyards and houses, that we might buy grain because of the famine." There were also those who said, "We have borrowed money for the king's tax on our lands and vineyards. Yet now our flesh is as the flesh of our brethren, our children as their children. And indeed, we are forcing our sons and daughters to be slaves, and some of our daughters have been brought into slavery. It is not in our power to redeem them, for other men have our lands and our vineyards." And I became very angry when I heard their outcry in these words. After serious thought, I rebuked the nobles and the rulers and said to them, Each of you is exacting usury from his brother. So I called a great assembly against them, and I said to them, according to our ability, we have redeemed our Jewish brethren who were sold to the nations. Now indeed will you even sell your brethren, or should they be sold to us? Then they were silenced and found nothing to say. Then I said, what you are doing is not good. Should you not walk in the fear of our God because of the reproach of the nations, our enemies? I also, with my brethren and my servants, am lending them money and grain. Please let us stop this usury. Restore now to them, even this day, their lands, their vineyards, their olive groves, and their houses. Also 100 of the money and the grain, the new wine and the oil that you have charged them. So they said, we will restore it, and we will require nothing from them. We will do as you say. Then I called the priests and required an oath from them that they would do according to this promise. Then I shook out the fold of my garment and said, so may God shake out each man from his house and from his property who does not perform this promise. Even thus may he be shaken out and emptied. And all the assembly said, Amen, and praise the Lord. Then the people did according to this promise. So, wow. I mean, he is basically telling the leaders here in Jerusalem, this is how it's going to be. This stops today. So this is, I mean, Ken, do you know anything about the cupbearer role? Is that a role that somebody like this would typically?
The cupbearer of the king, is that a role that somebody with this level of leadership capability would typically be in? Like, it seems very odd to me that somebody like this would be in that role like this. This seems like somebody that would be a military leader or something like that.
Well, Xerxes recognized his leadership ability as you brought out a while ago. As I said, the cupbearer was in charge of everything from planting, seeing that the vineyards were planted and fertilized, carried forth, and the pantry where the wines were kept, just like the baker. Pharaoh Joseph's story was in charge of all the food, the whole thing, fixing the food, preparing food, storing food. So they had massive responsibility.
Okay. So it's not uncommon that somebody with this level of leadership capability would be a cupbearer.
It's not what?
I said it's not uncommon in your mind that somebody with this level of leadership
That's right.
capability would be a cupbearer. Okay.
Well, that's one of the greatest. He was next to the king. I mean, he was closer to the king than anybody else.
Okay.
I think you see that as Joseph, you're not in the same situation. But when you're a king of a great nation, the ones that are next to you are not just everyday people.
Yeah.
They have some abilities.
Yeah.
See, the cupbearer could approach the king anytime. He was that close to the king. He did not have to be invited.
Okay.
And who would be given that honor except an exceptional man like you and I?
Okay. Yeah. So my perception of what a cupbearer was or should be has changed this morning based off the way y'all are saying it. So thank you.
When we say cupbearer, I think from this discussion this morning, I've always said that he takes his line.
Yeah.
But there was apparently, from what Ken said, there's a lot more.
Yeah. And I suspected that, but I couldn't find anything.
Well, I think that's all, if you just pick up the five and the feet, you know, just for that,
Mhm.
then that's probably what it's supposed to get at.
Yes.
See, that's really what the butler was in Joseph's story. He was a cupbearer,
Oh, okay.
along with many other responsibilities.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, sir.
I give you a little historical, like Ken was saying, in that part of the world, the cupbearer was someone that was in a higher position. A lot of times we take a European look at what the cupbearer was like, and that was somebody that was just pulled out to stick in into a place to be poisoned, so the king didn't get poisoned.
A disposable
Yeah,
person,
and so they were considered disposable, so.
yeah, but that's not the case.
That's kind of the idea I had cookware for a long time too, in the scriptures, but, you know, that wasn't the case in that part of the world.
I learned something this morning. Thank you.
What about the chosen?
I don't know, Ken,
I think she was gonna be the cousin.
The king personally chose him.
I just think it's the attributes that a man of God wants out, you know, same thing with Joseph, Daniel, Moses, God just
Spring rises.
screams like, oh, it's a good person, honest person,
Yeah.
hard worker, labor, because I think that's, who goes all those stories that, you know, men.
Good comments. Does anybody know exactly what time of building? I'm trying to figure out if I need to.
You'll see the little bird is.
You got like 7 or 8 minutes.
So there it is out. Okay, let's see here. Oh, shit, this around. Let's go ahead and skip over to chapter 13. This is after, he's already returned, from what I was told, he's already returned back to Artaxerxes, and then he was allowed to come back, and some things have happened. Since he was gone, he arrives back, and he's like, whoa, hey, let's pump the brakes, you know, this stuff's not right, what's happening here, so. I'll start reading here in verse 1. On that day, so this is after Ezra has come and read the law for all the people. People have listened to that, they confessed their wrongdoings, all these people that came back from Babylon, they openly confessed, we messed up, we're not loyal to God, we did it, and we're moving forward. They created a new document and covenant thing, a bunch of these leaders, including Nehemiah, put their seal on it. And then I assume that's when Nehemiah goes back to Persia to check in with Artaxerxes, and he comes back, and this is in chapter 13 that it was. So on that day, they read from the book of Moses in the hearing of the people. And it was found written that no Ammonite or Moabite should ever come into the assembly of God, because they had not met the children of Israel with bread and water, but hired Balaam against them and cursed them. However, our God turned the curse into a blessing. So it was when they had heard the law that they separated all the mixed multitude from Israel. Now before this, Elisha, the priest, having authority over the storerooms of the house of our God, was allied with Tobiah.
Y'all remember Tobiah from previous chapters. And he prepared for him a large room where previously they had stored the grain offerings, the frankincense, the articles, the tithes of grain, the new wine and oil, which were commanded to be given to the Levites and singers and gatekeepers, and the offerings for the priests. But during all this, I was not in Jerusalem, for in the 32nd year of Artaxerxes, king of Babylon, I had returned to the king. Then after certain days, I obtained leave from the king, and I came to Jerusalem and discovered the evil that Eliashib had done for Tobiah in preparing a room for him in the courts of the house of God, and it grieved me bitterly. Therefore I threw all the household goods of Tobiah out of the room. Then I commanded them to cleanse the rooms, and I brought back into them the articles of the house of God, with the grain offering and the frankincense. I also realized that the portions of the Levites had not been given them, for each of the Levites and the singers who did the work had gone back to his field. So I contended with the rulers, and said, why is the house of God forsaken? And I gathered them together and set them in their place. Then all Judah brought the tithe of the grain and the new wine and the oil to the storehouse. And I appointed as treasurers over the storehouse Shelemiah the priest, and Zadok the scribe, and of the Levites, Pedaiah, and next to them was Hanan the son of Zakur, son of Mattaniah, for they were considered faithful, and their task was to distribute to their brethren. Remember me, O my God, concerning this, and do not wipe out my good deeds that I have done for the house of my God and for its services. In those days I saw people in Judah treading wine presses on the Sabbath, and bringing in sheaves and loading donkeys with wine, grapes, figs, and all kinds of burdens, which they brought into Jerusalem on the Sabbath day. And I warned them about the day on which they were selling provisions. Men of Tyre dwelt there also, who brought in fish and all kinds of goods, and sold them on the Sabbath to the children of Judah and in Jerusalem. Then I contended with the nobles of Judah, and said to them, what evil thing is this that you do, by which you profane the Sabbath day? Did not your fathers do thus, and did not our God bring all this disaster on us, on this city? Yet you bring added wrath on Israel by profaning the Sabbath. So it was at the gates of Jerusalem, as it began to be dark before the Sabbath, that I commanded the gates to be shut, and charged that they must not be opened till after the Sabbath. Then I posted some of my servants at the gates, so that no burdens would be brought in on the Sabbath day. Now the merchants and sellers of all kinds of wares lodged outside Jerusalem once or twice. Then I warned them and said to them, why do you spend the night around the wall? If you do so again, I will lay hands on you. From that time on, they came no more on the Sabbath. And I commanded the Levites that they should cleanse themselves, and that they should go and guard the gates to sanctify the Sabbath day. Remember me, O my God, concerning this also, and spare me according to the greatness of your mercy. In those days, I also saw Jews who had married women of Ashdod, Ammon, and Moab, and half of their children spoke the language of Ashdod and could not speak the language of Judah, but spoke according to the language of one or the other people. So I contended with them and cursed them, struck some of them and pulled out their hair, and made them swear by God, saying, you shall not give your daughters as wives to their sons, nor take their daughters for your sons or yourselves. So again here, he is cleaning house. I mean, he's come in and he is addressing and contending with the rulers, the people that are in leadership roles, about what they are doing wrong in their worship to God. They're basically setting themselves up to be taken off into captivity again immediately. I mean, he leaves for just a little while and they're already back into these bad habits and doing things that aren't pleasing to God, heading down a path that's going to land them right back into captivity after he's done all this work to get them to this point. So it's no surprise that he comes in and, cracking heads, but again, just shows his leadership capability. This is the reform that Ken was talking about. So takeaways: Nehemiah is a story of restoration, redemption, reform. Nehemiah was selfless. He overcame doubters. He did whatever it took to get this job done. Was able to convey his passion to other people. He unified people toward a common goal. Was a clear communicator, and he led other leaders. He had the ability to influence other people that had leadership capabilities as well. And he placed himself in harm's way for the sake of others, and ultimately accomplished a lot of good. So do y'all have anything to add to that summary?
Yeah, I mean, said that, I think it was just come and go.
Yeah, it really highlights the need for leadership and the wisdom of God that we see in God, and having elders in the church that is carrying out work. That's an established practice for a reason.
In less than a year after the church was established, there were problems. There were problems, so that's new nature. And that's why you say, emphasize we need good leadership.
I heard a deal on Facebook or what, said if Paul could use the church today, we'd probably get a letter.
Probably. Yeah, and the thing about, these roles or leaders or whatever, if Christians aren't the ones stepping up in those roles, somebody's going to. And it's gonna be the people like Arrive and Civil Life and these guys. Just something to consider. All right, that's all I had this morning. Nobody has anything else?